My name is Marilyn, and I'm 63 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in my old Ford sedan outside my son's house on this freezing December night. Through his warm, glowing windows, I can see David and his wife Sarah enjoying dinner together, laughing at something on television. Meanwhile, I'm wrapped in a thin blanket, trying to stay warm with nothing but stale coffee from my thermos. 3 days ago, I lost my house to foreclosure. When I came to my only child for help, he said I could stay just a few days. But tonight, he told me I need to sleep in my car a little longer because he's too busy with work projects. He has no idea what's coming. Before I tell you how everything changed, let me know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe what happened next. Looking back, I realize I created this monster myself. 30 years ago, I built Sterling Properties from nothing, starting with a small loan of $50,000 and endless determination. My husband Robert and I worked 18-hour days, sacrificing weekends and holidays to build something meaningful for our family. We started by flipping small houses in rough neighborhoods, doing most of the renovation work ourselves. When David was born, we promised him he'd never struggle like we did. That promise became our biggest mistake. By the time he was 10, Sterling Properties had grown into a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. We owned apartment complexes, commercial buildings, and luxury developments across 3 states. David grew up in our 8-bedroom mansion with everything handed to him on a silver platter. Private schools that cost more than most people's annual salaries, luxury vacations to Europe every summer, a brand new BMW for his 16th birthday. He never worked a summer job, never did chores, never faced any real consequences for his actions. When he graduated from college with a business degree he joined Sterling Properties as a vice president, not because he was qualified, but because he expected to inherit everything. He showed up to meetings an hour late, left early for lunch with friends, and spent most of his time on his phone playing games or texting Sarah. I kept hoping he'd mature, show some initiative, demonstrate even a fraction of the work ethic Robert and I had poured into building this company. Instead, David seemed to view Sterling Properties as his personal trust fund, a source of easy money that would flow to him forever without any effort on his part. 3 years ago, Robert died suddenly from a massive heart attack while reviewing construction plans in his home office. The grief nearly destroyed me, but I had to keep the business running. We had hundreds of employees depending on their paychecks, dozens of ongoing projects, and investors who needed reassurance that Sterling Properties would continue operating smoothly. David barely helped with funeral arrangements, more concerned about when the will would be read than about honoring his father's memory. When our attorney, Jonathan Johnson, read the will aloud, David's face fell dramatically. Everything was left to me, not directly to him. Robert and I had discussed this decision extensively. We wanted David to prove himself capable before inheriting such massive wealth and responsibility. From that moment, David's resentment became impossible to ignore. He'd make snide comments during board meetings, questioning my decisions and undermining my authority in front of employees who'd worked with us for decades. His entitlement grew more obvious each month, as if he believed he deserved to inherit everything simply because he existed. Last month, our biggest development partner, Rick Morrison, disappeared overnight with $3 million of our project funds. Rick had been a trusted friend for over 15 years, someone Robert and I had considered family. His betrayal was devastating personally, but financially it created an immediate crisis. The $3 million was earmarked for completing our luxury condominium project downtown. Without those funds, we couldn't pay. Contractors couldn't meet bank loan requirements and couldn't deliver units to buyers who'd already made deposits. I had to make an impossible choice: use the money from our family home mortgage to cover the shortfall, or let Sterling Properties collapse and destroy the livelihoods of everyone who depended on us. I chose to save the company, thinking I could refinance our personal mortgage once the development project generated revenue. I'd made similar calculated risks dozens of times over 30 years of business. This time, however, the timing couldn't have been worse. Interest rates had risen dramatically over the previous 6 months. The real estate market had softened significantly. Banks that had eagerly loaned us millions just 2 years earlier were now scrutinizing every application with extreme caution. My refinancing applications were denied one after another, each rejection bringing me closer to the foreclosure that seemed inevitable. I tried explaining the situation to David, hoping he'd understand that this was temporary, that we'd recover once new investors came through or once the condominium sales generated cash flow. He nodded absently during our conversations, more interested in planning his weekend golf trips with Sarah than in understanding the financial crisis that threatened everything we'd built. When I suggested he might need to temporarily reduce his salary or cut back on his expensive lifestyle, he laughed as if I'd told a joke. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You always figure things out. You'll handle this like you handle everything else." His casual dismissal of our family's financial catastrophe revealed just how completely disconnected he'd become from reality. In David's mind, money appeared magically, problems solved themselves, and consequences only affected other people. The bank moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 3 weeks of my final refinancing denial, foreclosure notices arrived by certified mail. The legal language was cold and impersonal, but the message was clear. I had 30 days to vacate the home Robert and I had built together, the house where we'd raised David, the place that held 30 years of memories. I tried calling David repeatedly that morning, but his phone went straight to voicemail. When I finally reached him at Sarah's yoga studio, he was annoyed that I'd interrupted his workout schedule. I explained about the foreclosure notice, about the 30-day deadline, about needing to find somewhere to stay while I figured out our next steps. "That's rough, Mom," he said casually, as if I'd told him about a minor inconvenience rather than the loss of our family home. "But you're resourceful. You'll think of something." The day the sheriff's department came to escort me out, David was conveniently at work attending what he claimed was an urgent client meeting. Later, I discovered he had actually been at a baseball game with friends posting photos on social media while his mother lost everything. I called him from my car in the driveway, crying harder than I had since Robert's funeral. My voice was barely audible through the tears as I explained that I was officially homeless, that I had nowhere to go, that I needed my son's help for the first time in my adult life. His response still echoes in my mind with perfect, painful clarity. "Just come over, Mom. We'll figure something out. Sarah won't mind. Just for a few days, though. We've got a lot going on right now." Those first 2 nights, sleeping on their guest room couch, felt humiliating beyond description. The couch was expensive, but uncomfortable, clearly chosen for appearance rather than functionality. Sarah made passive-aggressive comments about privacy and space, sighing loudly whenever I used their bathroom or kitchen. David avoided eye contact during breakfast, rushing off to meetings that I suspected weren't nearly as important as he claimed. When I tried to discuss potential solutions, ways I might contribute to household expenses or help with chores, he waved me off dismissively. "Don't worry about all that stuff, Mom. Just focus on getting back on your feet." But he never asked what that might look like, never offered concrete help, never suggested we work together to solve the problem that affected our entire family. The third morning, everything changed dramatically. I woke up early to the sound of heated whispers coming from David and Sarah's bedroom. Sarah wasn't bothering to keep her voice down anymore. "This isn't working, David. Your mother is disrupting our entire routine. She's always in the kitchen when I want to make breakfast, always in the living room when I want to watch television. We need our space back. We need our privacy." I know, David replied, sounding more frustrated than sympathetic. "She's being really needy right now. I didn't realize she'd be so high maintenance." High maintenance. That's how my son described his homeless mother who'd built the company that funded his entire lifestyle. An hour later, David found me in their kitchen trying to stay out of everyone's way while drinking coffee. He was fidgeting with his phone, avoiding direct eye contact, clearly preparing to say something unpleasant. "Mom, I know this situation is really hard for you, but Sarah and I have been talking. I'm working on this massive commercial development project right now, and we really need some quiet time to focus. The next few weeks are going to be incredibly intense." He paused, still not looking at me directly, still playing with his phone like a nervous teenager. "Would you mind staying in your car for just a little while? Just until things settle down at work and I can figure out a more permanent solution for you." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to realize what he'd just asked his 63-year-old mother to do. When the silence stretched uncomfortably long, when he just stood there looking annoyed by my shocked expression, something fundamental broke inside my chest. "You want me to sleep in my car?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just temporary," he said, already walking toward the door, already escaping this uncomfortable conversation. "A few more days tops. I promise we'll figure something out permanent really soon." As he grabbed his keys and headed for the garage, I realized that my son had just asked his mother to be homeless, so that he and his wife could have privacy in the house that my life's work had helped them afford. That first night at the Ford was the longest, coldest, most humiliating experience of my adult life. The December wind cut right through the thin metal doors and windows, making my arthritis flare up in joints I'd forgotten could hurt so badly. I had a bag of stale sandwiches that Sarah had grudgingly given me, along with a thermos of coffee that went cold within 2 hours. Around midnight, I watched David and Sarah through their living room window. They were cuddled together on the leather sofa that Robert and I had bought when Sterling Properties first hit $1 million in annual revenue. They looked so comfortable, so warm, so completely unbothered by the fact that his mother was freezing 20 feet away in a car older than their marriage. The temperature dropped to 18 degrees that night. I ran the engine periodically to get some heat, but I couldn't afford to waste gas running it continuously. I wrapped myself in every piece of clothing I could find, but nothing stopped the bone-deep cold that seemed to settle into my very soul. I called David the next morning, teeth chattering so badly I could barely speak coherently. "David, honey, I really need to come inside for a while. I barely slept last night, and I think I might be getting sick from the cold." "Mom, I told you yesterday that I'm absolutely swamped with this project. Can you just hang tight a little longer? I promise we'll figure something out permanent really soon." The second night was even worse. A winter storm moved through, bringing freezing rain that turned to ice on my windshield. I couldn't see outside, couldn't escape the claustrophobic feeling of being trapped in a metal box while ice formed around me like a tomb. Mrs. Patterson from our old neighborhood drove by around 7 p.m. and recognized me sitting in the car. The shock and pity in her eyes when she realized I was living in my vehicle was absolutely unbearable. She tapped on my window, offering to let me stay with her and her husband, but my pride wouldn't let me accept charity from neighbors who remembered when I used to host elaborate dinner parties for 50 people. By the third night, my sadness had transformed into something much more dangerous. Every time I saw David's silhouette moving around that warm, comfortable house, every time Sarah's laughter drifted through their windows, I felt my resentment growing stronger and more focused. They had chosen their comfort over my basic human dignity. They had chosen their privacy over their mother's health and safety. They had chosen to treat me like an inconvenience rather than like family. The fourth night, I made a decision that would change everything permanently. David came outside around 10 p.m., not to invite me in for warmth, but to update me on his timeline for solving my homelessness. "This project is really complicated, Mom. The client is being super demanding, and I need total focus for the next few days. Can you just bear with me a little longer? Maybe by the weekend I'll have some time to look into other options for you." Other options, as if his mother was a problem to be outsourced rather than a human being who deserved basic respect and care. As I watched him walk back into his comfortable, heated home, I realized exactly what I needed to do. David had made a critical error in his calculations. While he'd been coasting through life on inherited privilege, assuming everything would always be handed to him, I'd been building and maintaining the empire that funded his entire existence. Sterling Properties wasn't just some family business that he'd automatically inherit someday. I still controlled every aspect of it: the bank accounts, the investment portfolios, the property holdings, the business partnerships, everything. David had never bothered learning how any of it actually worked. More importantly, David had no idea about the $15 million trust fund that Robert and I had established shortly before his death. The trust was designed to provide David with financial security for life, but only after he'd proven himself capable of handling such enormous wealth responsibly. David had never asked about the trust's details, never read the legal documents, never questioned how inheritance would actually work. He just assumed that money would flow to him automatically, like everything else in his privileged life had always done. That night, shivering in my car while my son enjoyed his warm house, I started making phone calls that would reshape both of our lives forever. My first call went to Jonathan Johnson, our family attorney who'd handled Robert's will and helped establish the trust fund. Even though it was nearly 11 p.m., Jonathan answered on the second ring. He'd been Robert's college roommate before becoming our lawyer, and he knew our family situation intimately. "Marilyn, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I explained everything that had happened over the past week: the foreclosure, David's initial promise to help, the subsequent rejection, and the 4 nights I'd spent sleeping in my car outside his house. Jonathan's silence grew more ominous as my story continued. "That ungrateful little bastard," he finally said, using language I'd never heard from our normally diplomatic attorney. "Robert would be absolutely horrified if he knew how David was treating you. Jonathan, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. We're making major changes to all the trust arrangements, and I want everything legally bulletproof before David realizes what's happening." I'll clear my entire schedule, he replied immediately. This ends tomorrow. My second call went to Marcus Williams, our company accountant who'd managed Sterling Properties finances for over 20 years. Marcus had watched David grow up, had seen his complete lack of interest in learning the business, and had privately expressed concerns about David's financial irresponsibility. Marcus, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need you to freeze all credit card accounts that David has access to, effective immediately. Also, remove his name from every company account, every investment portfolio, and every financial instrument associated with Sterling Properties. Consider it done, Marcus said without hesitation. Should I ask why, or do I not want to know? Let's just say that David needs to learn what real life feels like when you don't have mommy's money protecting you from consequences. My third call went to Rebecca Thompson, our Human Resources Director. Rebecca had worked with us for 15 years, starting as an administrative assistant and working her way up through pure competence and dedication. She'd always been professional in her interactions with David, but I'd noticed her rolling her eyes when he showed up late or left early for personal commitments. Rebecca, David's employment with Sterling Properties is terminated immediately. Have security escort him out of the building when he arrives Monday morning. Make sure he returns his company credit cards, his building access key, and his company laptop. Finally, Rebecca said with obvious relief. That boy has been dead weight for years. Should I process his final paycheck? Give him whatever he's legally entitled to for work already completed, but nothing more. No severance, no extension of benefits, nothing beyond the bare minimum required by law. Friday morning, I drove straight to Jonathan's office downtown. My back ached terribly from 4 nights of sleeping in bucket seats, and I probably looked like I'd been living rough, but my mind had never been clearer about what needed to happen. Marilyn, you look exhausted, Jonathan said, pouring me coffee and offering me a comfortable chair in his conference room. Tell me exactly what you want to accomplish, and we'll make it happen. I explained my complete plan. The $15 million trust fund would be restructured to benefit charitable organizations instead of David. The local homeless shelter would receive $5 million, a women's crisis center would get $5 million, and an educational foundation would receive the remaining $5 million. David would receive a modest monthly allowance of $5,000 from a smaller trust, enough to cover basic living expenses, but nowhere near enough to maintain his current lifestyle of luxury and entitlement. Sterling Properties would also be restructured completely. Instead of David inheriting my controlling interest in the company, those shares would be sold to our primary competitor, Hartwell Development Group. The proceeds from that sale would also go to the same charitable organizations. This will effectively disinherit David from the wealth he's been counting on, Jonathan explained carefully. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? These changes will be extremely difficult to reverse once they're implemented. I have never been more certain about any decision in my entire life, I replied. David has shown me exactly who he is when tested by adversity. He's selfish, entitled, and completely lacking in basic human decency. He doesn't deserve to inherit wealth that he had no role in creating. We spent 4 hours that Friday restructuring everything. Jonathan had his entire legal team working on documentation, ensuring that every change would be legally bulletproof and immediately enforceable. By closing time, David's financial future had been completely rewritten without his knowledge. Saturday morning, I visited First National Bank, where Sterling Properties had maintained accounts for over 20 years. The bank manager, Patricia Coleman, had known our family since David was in elementary school. She looked shocked when I explained that I wanted David's name removed from every single account associated with our business or personal finances. Mrs. Sterling, this is very unusual, Patricia said carefully. Are you sure you want to make such dramatic changes? Once we process these requests, David will lose access to everything immediately. Patricia, my son, asked his homeless mother to sleep in her car so he wouldn't be inconvenienced by her presence. I think that tells us everything we need to know about his character. Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to disgust. I'll process everything immediately. That boy should be ashamed of himself. My final stop was Sterling Properties headquarters, where I met with Rebecca Thompson to finalize David's termination. Rebecca had already prepared all the necessary paperwork, including a detailed inventory of company property that David would need to return. Security will be ready Monday morning, Rebecca assured me. We've also changed his computer passwords and revoked his building access. He won't be able to enter the premises. That weekend, David had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse completely. He spent Saturday playing golf at the country club while I sat in my car making final preparations and double-checking that Every aspect of my plan was ready for implementation. Sunday afternoon, I watched through their living room window as David and Sarah went through their normal routine expensive takeout for lunch, afternoon naps on the couch, evening television shows. They looked so relaxed, so completely confident that their comfortable lifestyle would continue indefinitely. Ciao. Monday morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. I positioned my car across the street from David's driveway where I could observe everything clearly. At 8:30, he came rushing out of the house, running late for work as usual. He was talking on his phone, probably making excuses to someone about why he'd be arriving after 9 a.m. again. I followed him to Sterling Properties' downtown office building, parking across the street where I could watch the front entrance. David hurried inside, completely unaware that his employment had already been terminated and that security was waiting for him. At 9:15, my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number, and I could hear panic in his voice before he even spoke. Mom, something really weird is happening. I tried to use my credit card for coffee this morning, and it was declined. Then, when I got to the office, security told me I can't enter the building. They're saying I don't work here anymore. This has to be some kind of computer error or misunderstanding. Where are you right now? I asked, keeping my voice calm and neutral. I'm standing outside our office building, and they're telling me to leave the property. The security guard says my employment was terminated, but that's impossible. Nobody told me anything about being fired. What's happening? No mistake, David. You told me to sleep in my car, so I had plenty of time to make some very important phone calls. The silence stretched so long that I thought he might have hung up. When his voice came back, it sounded smaller and more frightened than I'd ever heard from him in his entire adult life. Mom, what did you do? I did exactly what you forced me to do, David. I took care of myself since my own son clearly wasn't going to. But I don't understand. You can't just fire me from our family company. Dad left everything to you, but Sterling Properties belongs to our family. Sterling Properties belongs to me, David. Your father and I built it together, and when he died, ownership passed entirely to me. You never had any legal claim to the business beyond the salary I was generous enough to pay you for work you rarely bothered to do competently. This is crazy, Mom. You're angry about the car thing, I get that. But you can't destroy my entire career over one mistake. One mistake, David. You asked your homeless mother to sleep in her car for a week because helping her would have been inconvenient for you. That's not a mistake. That's a character defect so severe that I can't trust you with anything important ever again. Sean. Within 2 hours, David was standing beside my car with tears streaming down his face. Sarah was with him, looking pale and shaken, clearly beginning to understand that their comfortable lifestyle was about to change dramatically. I rolled down my window just enough to speak clearly, but not enough to suggest I was interested in a lengthy conversation. Mom, please, we can fix this, David said, his voice breaking with desperation. Come inside the house. We'll talk everything through. We'll figure out a solution that works for everyone. I'm sorry about asking you to sleep in the car. That was wrong. I know it was wrong. You had multiple chances to show love and respect David. You chose your comfort over your mother's basic human dignity. You chose your privacy over family loyalty. You chose a work project over helping the woman who gave you everything you've ever had. Sarah tried to interrupt, suddenly full of apologies and excuses about stress and misunderstandings, but I wasn't interested in hearing from someone who'd actively encouraged my son to abandon his homeless mother. Mrs. Sterling, we made a terrible mistake, Sarah said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. We were overwhelmed and selfish, but we want to make it right. Please don't punish us for one bad week. Sarah, you didn't make a mistake. You revealed who you really are when tested by inconvenience, the same way David revealed who he really is. I'm not punishing either of you. I'm simply protecting myself from people who've demonstrated they can't be trusted. David grabbed my car door handle desperately. Mom, I'm begging you. I was wrong. I was selfish. I was horrible to you. But please don't destroy my entire future over this. What about forgiveness? What about second chances? What about the week I spent sleeping in this car while you enjoyed your warm house? What about the second chances I gave you every time you disappointed me over the past 35 years? I started my engine, and David's desperation became even more intense. Mom, where will you go? How will you survive without Sterling Properties? How will I survive without my job, without access to the family money? David, I survived building Sterling Properties from absolutely nothing. I survived losing our family home. I survived sleeping in this car for a week while my son pretended I didn't exist. I'll figure out how to survive without you. But what about me? What about Sarah? We can't afford our mortgage payments without my salary. We can't maintain our lifestyle without access to the company accounts. I looked directly at this man I'd raised, this person I'd loved unconditionally for 35 years, this human being I'd given everything to, only to discover he'd give me nothing in return when I needed him most. You'll figure something out, David, or you won't. Either way, it's your problem now, not mine. As I drove away from that conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine freedom. Real, authentic liberation from obligation, from disappointment, from the exhausting cycle of giving everything to someone who valued nothing. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't responsible for David's happiness, David's future, or David's financial security. He was 35 years old, healthy, educated, and perfectly capable of taking care of himself if he chose to apply effort rather than relying on inherited wealth. 6 months later, I'm living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town. It's small, quiet, and completely mine. The rent is affordable on my Social Security and the small pension I'd established years ago. I volunteer 3 days a week at the homeless shelter that's now benefiting from the restructured trust fund. The irony isn't lost on me that I understand homelessness and financial insecurity better than most of the shelter's board members ever will. My experience sleeping in that car, feeling abandoned and desperate, helps me connect with clients in ways that pure sympathy never could. David calls occasionally, usually when he's facing some new crisis that his reduced circumstances have created. He's working construction now, learning what physical labor feels like for the first time in his privileged life. His hands are calloused, his back aches, and he comes home exhausted every night instead of energized for golf or expensive dinners. He and Sarah had to sell their house within 3 months and move into a small rental apartment. Their marriage is struggling under financial pressure for the first time ever. Sarah has taken a job at a department store, something she never imagined she'd need to do. The woman who used to complain about my presence disrupting her privacy now works retail and comes home too tired to care about luxury or comfort. Sometimes David cries during our phone conversations, apologizing repeatedly for that week I spent in my car. He claims he's learned valuable lessons about respect and gratitude. He promises he's becoming a better person through hardship and struggle. I don't hang up on him anymore, but I don't offer to fix his problems either. When he asks for financial help, I remind him that he chose to treat his mother like an inconvenience when she needed help. When he complains about working long hours for modest pay, I remind him about the company he used to own part of before he decided his comfort was more important than family loyalty. "Mom, I understand why you're angry," he said during our last conversation. "I understand why you felt like you had to teach me a lesson. But how long is this punishment going to last? When will I have suffered enough to earn your forgiveness?" David, this isn't punishment, and it's not about forgiveness. This is about natural consequences and personal responsibility. You're learning what life feels like when you don't have inherited wealth protecting you from your choices. But I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything anymore? Being my son means you had advantages and opportunities that most people never get. It doesn't mean you're entitled to be supported forever, regardless of how you treat the people who love you. Real love isn't about giving everything to your children unconditionally. It's about teaching them to value what truly matters: respect, gratitude, compassion, and personal responsibility. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices without rushing in to rescue them. David is learning to be self-reliant for the first time in his life. That education is painful, but it's necessary. Whether he becomes a better person because of this experience remains to be seen. What I know for certain is that I'll never again sacrifice my dignity, my security, or my self-respect for someone who refuses to value those things. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to teach someone you love an important lesson even when it broke your heart? Have you found yourself giving everything to family members who took your generosity for granted? Share your story in the comments below, because I know I'm not the only parent who struggled with entitled children. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal boundaries, and finding strength in impossible situations. Please, share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone experience the natural consequences of their choices, no matter how much it hurts to watch.